And while you're moving around, I'd just like to welcome everyone that's here from Winterfaith, as well as all of our attendees from Ripple. My name is Jillian Shore. I use she, they pronouns. I'm a junior here at Elon, and I'm going to be the moderator for our panel tonight. So welcome. Our theme tonight for our discussion is going to be reproductive justice across faith traditions. And I'd like to give a few disclaimers. So please be aware that although reproductive justice is often associated with womanhood and femininity, we will be using ungendered language in our conversation as well as the Q&A section. So please be respectful and inclusive of all identities. When we misspeak, we will try to correct ourselves, or someone will respectfully and kindly respect you. And we will have patience with each other because we all make mistakes. And before we officially get started with our questions, I'm going to take a moment to provide a couple important explanations and definitions for some terms that will be commonly used tonight. Reproductive justice is defined by Sister Song as the human right to maintain bodily autonomy, have or not have children, and parent the children that we do have in a safe and sustainable community. We will be using words such as faith, spirituality, religion, worldview, etc. Please be mindful that these words mean different things to different people and hold different weights to those individuals. Lastly, what is said on this panel may or may not necessarily directly reflect the views and values of the Truett Center or of the Ripple Conference. If you need or want to speak to a chaplain at all this weekend, please reach out to someone on our leadership team and we'd be happy to connect you. So to start, on our panel tonight, we have Hillary Zakin. Sure. Dr. Keely Gales. And Reverend Brandy Jasmine Mimitzrayim. So first, I'd like to start by having you all introduce yourselves and just tell us, who are you, what is your relationship with reproductive justice and spirituality?
Check, check. Can you hear me all right? So I am Dr. Keely Gales. I was invited to the panel because I am a pelvic health physical therapist. So that means that I get to work with individuals through their pregnancy, after their pregnancy, in young adulthood, in later adulthood, through most of the age spectrum. And along that path, I get to help them navigate themselves. I'm not really navigating for them, but through a lot of the different portions of reproductive justice, including trying to figure out, is birth control something that's for them or not for them, all the way to how do we feel about hormone replacement therapies, and of course around the time period of like peripartum during pregnancy and after.
I'm Reverend Brandy Jasmine Mimitzrayim. I am a pastor in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. This year I am celebrating 25 years in ministry. As a pastor, I unapologetically point to Jesus. As a person, a human being, my priority is the real lived experiences of Black queer women, and it is through that work that led me to the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice, where I serve as the Director of Institutional Engagement and Public Theology. And I lead programming, I teach, and I lead our Spiritual Youth for Reproductive Freedom, which is why I'm here. And I help those who are interested in serving populations who are in reproductive crises and learning and organizing around reproductive justice to do so.
Hi, I'm Hillary Zakin, and I'm here at Elon University as the Interim Assistant Dean of Multi-Faith Engagement. And I'm on this panel tonight because my first job out of college was with NARAL, Pro-Choice America, as it's called now, and that informed the rest of my career choices and everything that I did from there on. Being involved with reproductive justice work as my first job out of college shaped my worldview, and as a Jewish woman, I strongly believe that reproductive justice is a part of my identity and making sure that it's something that we talk about in all different communities. Thank you.
All right, so now that we've sort of addressed the topic of the discussion, the panel tonight, I want to address the topic of Ripple. So the theme of Ripple this year is stretching the limits of religious identity. So if y'all could tell us sort of what that means to you and how can we do that?
I'll start with this one. So I try to live my life very authentically and honestly, and as some of you know, my own personal motto is to live life in full color, which means to be unapologetically myself in all of our spaces. And Jewish identity means different things to different people. For me, it means that my Judaism guides my moral choices and my values without a direct correlation to belief in God. So for me, stretching the limits of religious identities allows me to say to you, I am very Jewish, yet I'm also agnostic, and I can lead a value-driven, ethical life without that belief in God.
I think I'm going to jump off from that because it sounds like we have more in common than I even knew. I am not Jewish, but I was raised in a Christian household with an agnostic father, and that's an interesting dichotomy. And so I would say that for me, stretching spirituality has meant, having a journey to come to the place where I can say that I believe that my morals that I learned as a child in a Christian household very much guide my everyday interactions with the world, with my patients, with my nonprofit, with everything. And yet I may not 100% subscribe to any particular religion in all of their beliefs. And I think that it took me a long time to feel like it was okay to live in that space. And I'm glad that I'm finally getting there.
I'm Christian-ish. I'm also a theologian and a Bardian. And so for me, what Christian-ish means is I am very Christian and also how do they call me at church? The most unchurchy pastor. So I point to Jesus unapologetically, but my Christianity is syncretized, infiltrated, includes EFA practices and rituals. I'm not going to explain that, as well as theological norms from Islam. So I'm Christian-ish, and my definition of stretching the limits of your religious identity is to be able to be who you are within your own religion and incorporate what helps you to be who you are as you are able to find yourself spiritually.
With your work with reproductive justice, how do we include people of all identities in terms of language, inclusion, and anyone of any diverse identity group?
We're not doing rock, paper, scissors. In my work, what is important to me is for us to understand that reproductive justice does not just look at what white women do. And so we are intentional, especially at RCRC, about the way that we talk about it being human rights and not women's rights. The way that we make sure that we're talking about women and other folk, right? And we don't use non-men, I hate that term. But we talk about women and other people, or we just say human rights, and we talk about reproductive freedom. We talk about what it means to be a human being participating in human reproduction and not just pregnancies and not just uteruses and not focusing on bodily issues. I'm trying to be really super polite, but the way I say it at work is we don't just focus on what white women do with their coochies. And so for us, that's how we look at the language issues and how we are intentional about including folks across the gender spectrum. We are cis-led, and so it's intentional for us to be open and to be willing to do that.
So I have two hats, well, four, but two that I'll talk about. One is I am a clinical pelvic health physical therapist. The other is I am the founder of a nonprofit called Health for the People. So I'm going to separate my answers a little bit for each of those. As a physical therapist, it's an interesting time to be a pelvic health physical therapist, and I'm very grateful that I didn't come into it earlier, because we were once called women's health physical therapy, and by once I mean just before I started PT school. That is how I learned about it and had no idea what that was. And for those of you who don't know either of these terms, that's fine. But women's health really focused around pregnancy, postpartum, urinary incontinence. It was all around largely white women, right? And what was happening with their uteruses and their vajayjays and making them happier. But luckily, over the last decade, there's been a huge push toward being more inclusive in our language. And one part of that is the section on women's health, is what it was called, is now the physical therapy, the pelvic health group. I'm sorry, I'm losing the word. But the point is that we intentionally switched that language to include all bodies, because men absolutely have pelvic health issues, as well as transgender individuals and people who are non-binary, and everybody has pelvic health issues. And one large piece of that is anybody who's had trauma, especially sexual trauma, often stores that in their pelvis. So if you are a part of or have been around people who are a part of any group that is marginalized, whether it be by race or sexual orientation, you will know that the rates of sexual trauma are higher, right? So for me, that's part of why I'm passionate about doing what I'm doing, and it really shows in my patient care, because I want to make sure that the language I'm using is not re-traumatizing. I want to make sure that I'm being very inclusive in all of everything that I do is to the best of my ability, and that when I'm corrected, I take it in stride and I say thank you for helping me do better for the next person. As far as for the nonprofit, our goal is to see a healthcare system that is reformed in a way that intentionally includes all stakeholders' vantage points moving forward. So what that means is we host a conversation and we look around and we say, who does this conversation matter to? Well, if we're talking about healthcare reform, is there anybody in this room that doesn't matter to, right? And if it is, it's probably because you've been lucky thus far and things have been okay, which was my life until I was in physical therapy school and I recognized, wow, our system's broken. And here I am, a part of it, right? And it was that realization that helped lead me to starting this nonprofit, because I feel like it's that important that we get it right the next time, because what we have right now is junk. It's broken, and it's not going to get better if we just keep pushing one party's agenda forward, or one group, whether it be, old white men or any individual vantage point is not the thing. We need all of those perspectives to try to get it right.
So I think about my work here at Elon, supporting students, all of whom are on their own journeys and who are learning more about themselves and their identities every day as they walk around this campus. And for me, a lot of this work is making sure that every single human being here is supported, and acknowledging that people with all different identities are going to need care in one way or another, and trying to be as intentional as we can with our language and the way we welcome people into our spaces and the way we create spaces where everyone, regardless of identity, can be served and belong if that's what they choose. So acknowledging that not everyone who needs reproductive health care is a woman, that trans and cis people also need that, and that everything that affects one of us affects all of us.
Right. And just to quickly reiterate the reproductive justice definition given before, the human right to maintain personal bodily autonomy, have children, not have children, and parent the children we have in a safe and sustainable community. Based on that, what is your own definition of reproductive justice, and in your practice, what do you include in that definition?
I like Sister Song's definition of reproductive justice, and I need to say that because I work for RCRC. I don't think it goes far enough. And just historically, Sister Song defined reproductive justice in 1993. And in 1990, there was a group of 30 indigenous women who met and came up with another definition of reproductive justice. And that definition also includes two-spirit people and trans people and access to health care. And so I think for me, my personal definition kind of incorporates the two. And that reproductive justice is the ability for humans to willfully participate in human reproduction as they choose, and access to take care of the organs and the bodies with which they are making these reproductive choices and reproductive decisions and participating in human reproduction. And that includes all parts of the body and not just the uterus and the coochie. And it means that we are taking care of ourselves and have access to the food and to the health care, the mental health care, and to all of the different things that we need to take care of ourselves. I forgot the other part of the question, but what's important for me is that there are so many ways that we talk about reproductive justice and leave out all of the other issues that are included in it. And so we don't talk about not just Black maternal health, but we don't talk about how there are some communities who can go to the doctor and receive what they need, and other communities who will go to the doctor and won't be heard or listened to because doctors are trained to disbelieve that they can feel pain. Let me just be blunt. We don't talk about how Black people go to the doctor and are not listened to. We don't talk about how brown people go to the doctor and are not listened to when we talk about reproductive health. We don't talk about how, for instance, my mom went to her gynecologist and had abnormal cells on her cervix. Don't tell my mama I told y'all her business. And they said, let me take it out. You're not using it anymore. Let me take out your uterus. Instead of offering her all of the multiple different techniques that can treat those abnormal cells. We don't talk about that when we're talking about pro-choice. We don't talk about that when we're just focusing on Sister Song's definition, because it's about children and it's about pregnancy. But participating in human reproduction is so much bigger than that. And taking care of the bodies that participate in human reproduction is so much bigger than whether or not you want children and whether or not you will have children or whether or not you can. It includes breast cancer. It includes all of these other issues that we kind of sweep to the side and let somebody else deal with it.
I love that, first of all. I would say that to expand on that a little bit from my perspective, I would say that I see, especially Black and brown bodies, that are not sent to physical therapy. But to be fair, a lot of people are not sent to pelvic physical therapy that should be. And I know that it's still a fairly young specialty, and a lot of people in this room probably have no idea what I'm talking about. But what we focus on is making sure that a person has a strong, balanced body, including their pelvic floor muscles. Those pelvic floor muscles help support your uterus, your bladder, your colon, make all those bowel and bladder things work the way they're supposed to, help keep your uterus in your body, ideally. But we do so much more than that. And one of my biggest pet peeves around this issue is that during pregnancy, there are hugely different amounts of referral, right? And it does very much depend on what practitioner you get. And the practitioners who are more likely to send you to get that care are in more affluent communities. They're even in those communities, they are, like you said, they're less likely to send someone who is Black or brown than they are to send a white woman. And part of that is because some of those white women, or more of those white women, have been able to self-educate or have had access to the circles where it's being discussed more, and they know to advocate for themselves. And there's just a paucity of education on how to support a birthing person's body. So I apologize, I use the word women a lot, but I'm trying. But in that, these people are having a lot of pain and a lot of serious dysfunction. And one of the biggest issues is that they end up not being able to continue working through their pregnancies. And that's a huge thing if you're on a limited income, which in current economic climate, Most people who are in the age range that they are trying to have babies do not have savings in this country. It's something like 75%, I saw a recent study, said that to take an 8-week unpaid maternity leave would make them use any savings that they had, right? I was one of those people 3 years ago, and it happened to fall right during COVID, which just made everything better, right? But that I'm very passionate about making sure we're supporting people through that process with the physical and with the financial resources and with the education and everything to allow them to be the best parents and people that they can be.
I'm not certain I can actually add much more. I just want to sort of acknowledge that while not all humans can bear children biologically, that's not a barrier to parenthood, and that's not preventing them from needing to seek reproductive health care. And back to what I said is I really view everything holistically. When something affects one of us, it affects all of us. So it's not just a women's issue, and it's not just a pregnant person's issue, it's a human issue.
Right. And now shifting gears a little bit towards the more religious side, if there's anything you would like us to know about the community or spirituality you come from, or if there are any misconceptions that you would like to address, I'd like you to use this space to do so before we get started on that conversation.
I took lots of notes for this one. So, within Jewish law, reproductive justice is extremely important, and reproductive freedom is a very Jewish issue. So this Shabbat is a Shabbat that we call within Jewish communities Repro Shabbat. Because every week, Jewish people read a section from the Torah, from the Bible on Saturday mornings, and this Shabbat we read, I have to find exactly, Exodus 21, 22 to 25, which is Parashat Mishpatim, which is where Jewish laws about abortion come from. So in this portion, and I'm just going to read briefly for you, if I could find it, I apologize. So many different things. Apologies. Too many papers. When men fight and one of them pushes a pregnant woman and a miscarriage results, but no other damage ensues, the one responsible shall be fined according to as the woman's husband may exact from him, the payment to be based on reckoning. But if other damage ensues, the penalty shall be life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. So Jewish understandings of abortion justice comes directly from that line. In other words, that until the fetus is developed into a born child, not a person. So the human who's of concern here is the mother, and that's based in that biblical verse. And actually, I don't know if everybody is aware of that, but Christian misconceptions about abortion actually is based on a mistranslation of that particular verse in lots of different later translations. So when we go back to Exodus, we're really looking at putting the life of the mother as a value. And I just wanted to go ahead and put that out there because this is what we call Repro Shabbat. And reproductive justice is a huge issue within Judaism. And it is not only possible, it's actually required when a mother's life is in danger.
So I'm a whole pastor, and there's a religious trauma is a thing, and a lot of religious trauma in the United States comes from Christianity, and we live in what we call a Christian society, right? So even where if you're not a Christian, you're kind of co-opted into it. So I say that because we need to be very honest about reality. And not to not all Christians it, and I'm still a whole pastor. So I think for me, some of the issues and misconceptions about Christianity is you can be pro-faith and pro-choice. They pay me to say that. You can be pro-faith and pro-choice. Also, most of what we see in society as Christian, what we are witnessing with Christian nationalism and white Christian supremacy does not come from the Bible. It's not Jesus. It's not Christianity. It's a bastardization, and I'm, again, a Barthian. So Karl Barth, the Swiss theologian, would have called it philosophy that knows no God. And so from my community, the misconception is that that's who we are. The vast majority of Christians ain't evangelical Christians. The vast majority of Christians worldwide ain't white and don't participate in white Christian supremacy. And so I think that's the first misconception. The second misconception I do want to talk about with reproductive justice is, again, the vast majority of Christians are pro-choice. The vast majority of Christians agree with reproductive justice. The vast majority of Christians aren't having these same conversations that you hear from the minority in the media. And I think that's the same across the board. The vast majority of Christians are also pro-LGBTQ. The vast majority of Christians are also not white supremacists. The vast majority of Christians aren't these extremely social conservatives that are just concerned with making sure that the white Christian nation stays afloat. That's not what Christianity is about. That's not who Jesus was. Jesus was not a white Christian American. Or white in general, or Christian, right? Like Jesus wasn't none of that. And so I think that's the first misconception, or the biggest misconception.
I like that you brought up religious trauma because, sorry, my mouth is dry. I might need more water in a second. But that is, by and large, why I no longer call myself a Christian, is because of religious trauma, and why it took me about a decade to come back to the idea of actually joining a church. And a lot of that stemmed from the pressures that were put on me by the church and by Christians around me about what I should or should not do with my body. And I think that's the reason that I pushed back for so long, is because, unfortunately, that is the misconception, is that you cannot be both. And I wish I had you as my pastor, because I probably wouldn't have had to take so long to get back to where I am now. But thank you so much. But I would say that the biggest misconception about my spiritual beliefs are that I might be amoral, or that I don't have spiritual beliefs because I do not subscribe to one particular religion, and that I'm going to hell because of it. But honestly, I believe that it is the morals that I learned, one in particular from my mom, that will never change. She said that we're all God's children, and that I am to love everyone, but I don't have to like everyone. And that is probably the number one driving force in my life, and why I work so hard to help people day in and day out, even when it's detrimental to myself, because of my Christian morals. So that's all.
Ooh, there we go. With the intersections of your spirituality and justice, how does that show up in your daily lives and in your work?
I am Black. I don't know if y'all noticed. And I am a Black Methodist, right? And the AME Church was founded in justice, and that's really what we do, really, really well. A lot of other things we don't. But that part, we do faith and justice. We do justice because Micah, the prophet, says do justice. We do justice because we believe that that's what Jesus did. All of the healings were about bringing back into community, and that reconciliation is an act of justice. Let me just caveat this. Most AMEs believe this. Some don't, and the some that don't are really, 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 really loud. So if you hear somebody and they like, Brandy don't believe what I believe, they just louder than me. Okay. And so for me, the intersections of my spirituality and faith come naturally. I'm not a liberation theologian. I'm a Bardian. There's a distinction. But who I am and where the spaces that I occupy do this naturally. I was raised AME. My mama was raised AME. Her mama was raised AME. It's a tradition. It's a family way of living. And so it's natural for me to walk in justice spaces and to be intentional about working for justice for those on the most edged margin, right? Like there's a center, then there's a periphery, and there's a periphery of the periphery, and then there's a periphery of the periphery of the periphery that we don't know, that we don't see because we're too close to the center. And so what the AME Church does, what Black Christians tend to do, is to look for the edges and to try to bring the edges closer to the center.
When I was talking about my identity, I was talking about the way we relate to other people. So within Judaism, there's a couple of different ways and a couple of different principles that are sort of guiding for me. And we talk about the relationship between people, Ben Adam l'chaver, and our relationship with God, Ben Adam l'makom. And for me, as an agnostic Jew, I think very much about the way we relate to one another. Ben Adam l'chavero, how we relate to one another, is the foundation of all of my values and my Jewish identity. And I think that part of that is recognizing that we're all living in an intersectional place, that all of us have multiple identities. There's not a single person in this room who only holds one identity. We are all many things at once. We are all of our ands, as I like to say. And I think that in the way we relate to one another, we need to recognize and hold up those ands and open up the table to let everyone bring their ands into this space. So that is, for me, how I bring my Jewish values into my work every day, and focus on intersectionality as well.
I would say for me that my spirituality boils down to what I just told you. Love everybody, right? And so that shows up in my work because I started a nonprofit with the goal of fixing our broken healthcare system, as lofty and huge as that is, and put myself in debt to do so because I believe it's that important. I see every patient that comes in my door as a person first, regardless of what color, what religion, anything and everything they are. And I allow my interactions with them on a one-on-one basis to create the relationship we have. And that's not just as a physical therapist, but in every relationship in my entire life. I think that is another thing that I believe came out of my Christian upbringing, was that I should see a person first and give them the grace that Jesus gave us, right? And not judge them based on things that they cannot control, or that maybe they could control, but they made a mistake, right? I believe in second chances. I believe in gentle education. I sometimes find myself in a treatment room with a person who has very different beliefs from myself, who in another setting I might like to put in their place. Okay, even in that setting, I want to put them in place, but I can't. I can and I can't. I shouldn't. So what I do is try very tactfully to use that as an opportunity to help them see a perspective that they don't have. I am a white cisgender woman. The world is not the hardest for me, but I surround myself with people who have very different vantage points than my own. My husband is multiracial. My children are biracial, multiracial. And I intentionally bring people into my life who have different perspectives so I can learn from them, so I can continue to be a better person. And I think that that's how I do it. In everything I do, I just keep those things at the forefront.
We've touched on this a little bit in some past questions and even in that last one, but how do you understand reproductive justice across intersectional identities and not just individual diverse identities?
So again, we look for the edges of the edges of the edges. And so reproductive justice that does that looks for the ways in which reproduction oppression is impacting people the furthest from the center. And so we are serious, and there were some of y'all who were in the SURF group. We take seriously what are the issues involved in reproductive oppression, because we can't talk about reproductive justice until we understand that there really is reproductive injustice, and it's not just you can't get an abortion. And we look at what impacts people's decisions and choices, what impacts, what laws, what way in the society, what religions, what personal things impact people's willful participation in reproductive justice and human reproduction. Sorry, y'all know what I'm trying to say. And so in looking at that, we take into account socioeconomic status, right? Would you make the same decision that you made today if you had enough money to do what you want to do? We look at whether or not people live in food deserts. Would you make the same decision if you could feed your child? We look at police brutality. We look at the education system. We look at all of these different things to see how does it impact us, right? If, for instance, you are infertile, it means something different if you live in one community and if you live in another community, because you have access to a different type of food that may or may not impact your infertility. And so we look at all of these things across the board, whether not just I'm black and queer and Christianish. We look at how those identities are informed and shaped by, and the impact on people who live in these social locations and are dealing with reproductive oppression. And just to be real clear, there is no one in this room who is not dealing with reproductive oppression. All y'all, even if you're a cisgendered male, you are. And so we look at what that means and how we, as RCRC, different hat, are able to guide you and to provide support for you in that.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about that cisgender male part for a second, because I am not one, but my husband is. And let me start it this way. When we got together, he wanted all the children we could possibly have. That was back when we thought my salary was going to be in a certain range as a doctor of physical therapy, and then we realized what the reality was, okay? And you know, I have one biological daughter and one wonderful bonus baby. And I make a choice every day not to have more children because we can't afford to. And because my husband has been sick for the last 5 years with something we're just now starting to find out because of the way our healthcare system is built. It took us going outside of the traditional, or I don't like the word traditional, the Western medicine program to find a doctor who would actually get to the root of his issues and treat him appropriately to help him get better. And that's part of the reason my passion started way before that. A part of why I'm so passionate about fixing our healthcare system is because it doesn't make sense that two people with college education, with never not working in their lives, not spending money in a way that we shouldn't, can't have a child we wish to have. And I am not alone. And I know the story is time and time again. And then I also want to talk about stress. Because as a physical therapist, I see stress as one of the #1 reasons people don't conceive. And when I tell women that, they don't believe me because they don't want the reason that they can't, birthing people, they don't want the reason that they can't conceive to be something that they had a part in, right? They want it to be because there's something wrong with their ovaries or their hormones or their husband or their, spouse, right? And there are so many examples, and you'll hear this, people who go through infertility for years and years and years, adopt, and then end up pregnant. And I firmly believe that the reason behind that is because the pressure to conceive is gone. And we don't adequately address stress in this country, and we like to separate mental health and physical health, and I'm so thankful that we finally are addressing mental health, right? So if we had to separate it to address it, great. Now can we weave it back in and understand that these are not separate things, right? So there's so many parts of what I do that come back around to this reproductive justice, but those are two perspectives that I have.
I really don't think I have anything to add, so I'm going to pass it back to Jillian.
And this is our last question. So before we head into our open Q&A section, I would just like to ask you all one last time, what does reproductive justice mean to you, and how do we, as individuals, communities, institutions, how do we support and achieve reproductive justice?
Reproductive justice is a means to achieve reproductive freedom. The goal is freedom, and you can't get to freedom if you don't go through justice. So it's a means to achieving freedom. And Pastor Brandy wants you to know what you believe and why you believe it. And that's how you can get involved and participate and work towards reproductive freedom. If you don't have a philosophical ground to do the work, then the work that you do will fly away. RC Brandy, the Director of Institutional Engagement and Public Theology, wants you to email me so that I can provide all of the wonderful things they pay me to provide for you. And that is access to materials as well as education on our compassionate care program that we give for those who desire to be caregivers for those who are in reproductive crises, to provide spiritual care or mental health care, as well as to work on our reproductive crises hotline and our Sacredly Speaking courses. And of course, please email me about the Spiritual Youth for Reproductive Freedom program that is open to people 16 to 25 who want to work for reproductive freedom on campuses and in communities. That is my infomercial.
I hope we're able to create that kind of community here at Elon. So I actually want to bring it back to abortion, which is one part of reproductive justice, but something that a lot of people in this room care about. And I know some of you live in states where laws are getting more stringent, and I just want to acknowledge that in this space, that there's a lot of things going on right now in this world that puts all of you at risk. And I say all of you because these things affect, I know I've said it again, every single person in this room, right? I actually found a statistic here that 1 in 4 people who can get pregnant will have had an abortion by the age of 45. Okay? So, well, and that means that if it's not you, it's someone you know, someone you love. And there are ways that you can get involved with different things, and it can be getting involved with RCRC, it can be getting involved on a personal level, it can be having conversations about this, talking to someone, offering help, offering something else, because I think engaging people in one-on-one conversations is another way that you can make change. I say something to you, you say something to someone else, and we are spreading the ripples, got it, wider and wider.
I hate to be the last one to speak, but I would say that reproductive justice means to me just supporting people throughout the lifespan. One thing that I really feel like is important is education, because in this room, I'm sure there are at least 50 different backgrounds as far as what you were taught in, let's say, middle school. Let's go that far back, because I think for me it was 4th grade the first time they started talking about this part of my body, right? And I think a lot of the trauma and a lot of the problems that we have around this issue go that far back. They go back to the point that we're expecting families to be the ones who are educating on our bodies and on how our bodies are supposed to engage with other people or not engage with other people. And I understand that families do have an important role in that, and they're going to shape, and your religious beliefs are going to shape part of that for you. But if we are not educating in schools about the basics of reproductive health, and then we're taking away a person's ability to have an abortion, what are we doing to people? Right? So I would say educate anyone and everyone you know. If you have a little sister or a cousin or a friend who grew up in a very repressive household that didn't learn about their body, have those conversations. Have them in a frank, open, honest way, because the reality is, one of the things I love the most about my job is I get to talk to people about things that they don't feel like are appropriate to talk about, that are 100% not taboo. I've had to teach grown women how to use a tampon because they didn't have someone who could, or they had a traumatic experience around it. I mean, very simple things like, can we please just destigmatize our bodies, right? And then, again, in my hats, I would say that from my Health for the People perspective, I would very much love it if anybody is interested in this process of changing our healthcare system. I think your voices are some of the most important, because you are tomorrow, you are today, and it is you who are inheriting the system that we currently have and have the most vested interest in seeing it improve. So please have a voice, reach out to me, see what you can do to volunteer or to at least lend your voice, if not your time or any financial contribution, to help us improve the system that we're all going to be stuck with for who knows how long.